All right, at 5:30, I'll call this special meeting on the budget to order. The first item on our agenda tonight is high school graduation photography services.
I'd like to make a motion that the board rescind its actions from April 10th, 2019, directing staff to use a quote process for LPSS high school graduation photography services and include quotes, examples of work, and liability insurance, and appoint a committee consisting of every high school principal, which shall solicit information from interested vendors in a public meeting for consideration by each school's graduation committee when selecting a photographer for 2020 graduation and subsequent ceremonies.
I have a motion by Mr. Lachelet. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion by Mr. Lachelet and a second by Ms. Morrison that the board rescind its action from April 10th, 2019, directing staff to use a quote process for LPSS high school graduation photography services, appoint a committee to solicit information in a public meeting for consideration by each school's graduation committee, starting with 2020 graduation. Do we have any public comment on this motion? Do I have any board member comment on this motion? Mr. Hidalgo.
All right. No, sir. I'll take my entire time period. Let me start off by saying that we had 8 board members here just a few days ago when we voted on this item, and it passed 6-2, 1 abstain. And now we have 4 board members here tonight, conveniently, for this item. This was a simple request of mine, was certainly taken out of context by a certain board member, but this was a simple request of mine of a fair process that a lot of the folks who would be impacted positively or negatively about this on this item preach the same thing. So we have this notion that somehow this would be a too quick of a process. We've got a month, or at the time over a month before graduation, to take care of this business. It has been decades, if ever this has been bid out. We don't know what kind of better deal, better process we could be following, because we haven't bid this out. And it's real interesting to me how a lot of the folks who, again, would be impacted by this feel very strongly about fair processes, fair bidding processes. But it's amazing to me how, if for them, that's okay, that there's no, it don't have to be a bidding process. It could just be the same old, same old. I just can't believe that we're bringing this back up for reconsideration after we voted on it, and it was again a 6-2, 1 abstain, to move forward with this. And conveniently tonight, the configuration of who has shown up to this meeting with this agenda item, I clearly see where this is going, but it's totally unfair that we have, we are supposed to be the stewards of taxpayer dollars, no matter how you look at it, whether or not it's direct or indirect. And this is nothing more than put it out to bid. Nobody said, and I don't even want to be part of the selection process, but put it out to bid, put it to quote rather, and let folks come back with an honest quote. We have plenty of time. There's also another notion that there's money spent and flyers out at schools. I've contacted several people. No one's seen a flyer. No one. Now, not every school has the same photographer, so this impacts more than one person, Mr. President. This impacts more than one individual. So the notion, the suggestion this is about something personal, or this impacts at least 3 photographers, maybe 4, but at least 3 that I'm aware of. So no one has seen flyers. So to suggest this has already been put into place is just, I don't know. I'm disappointed that this is happening right now. Just wanted to let you guys know.
Mr. Lachelet?
I won't take up much of your time, but just like what went on with the circumstance involving insurance back in August, we couldn't do a fair process because we were limited on time and we had to move in a hurry. So a fair process did not take place. This states that this will start in 2020, which is next graduation. This graduation, I'm not willing to impact the parents, the schools, or our graduates this last minute, 11th hour, whatever you want to call it. Fair process, yes, and from now on we will be doing fair process. 2020 is not a problem. Disrupting things right now for something that we already know is personal does not need to take place at the expense of these schools, these parents, these administration, or these students. So, next year, I have no problem with it. I don't think anybody will have a problem with it. Doing it now was not the right thing. The right thing is to stay status quo. There are at least 4 high schools that have their pamphlets out already. They have the material. And some of the parents have probably already chosen their packets. These families were already, and I'll say it again, they were already inconvenienced with the movement of graduation day to a week early. These people had venues rented, they had parties planned, they had vacations planned, they had senior trips, they had all of this planned, and graduation got moved. Okay, let us not disrupt things more. Let us be calm. Let us move forward in 2020 and rescind what we did last week and move forward. I have no problem wanting to do what you want to do with a fair process. But Mr. Hidalgo, in 2020, it makes sense. Today, it does not, in my opinion.
Mr. Broussard?
I agree with Mr. Lachele. I have no problem with the quote process, and at this late time of the year when graduation was approaching us about a month away, the quality of work that's going to be reviewed, I think it may be questioned. I have no problem supporting that for the year 2020. But like Mr. Lachele said, plans has already been made, and probably packages already been purchased, or know the price of purchase and know who the photographer is or will be at that time. And doing it now, I think it would disrupt the process in place now. I got no problem with putting it back on the agenda for the 2020 school year, giving time to review the applicants and their professionalism. And but now I think it's just bad timing.
Mr. Hidalgo?
Just again, Mr. President, for you, sir, not for you, but I'd like to direct my comments toward you as I could refute all of the arguments that were just said. I'm not going to. I just want to, speaking of bad timing, I just want to say once again that the board spoke on this item, and it was an overwhelming vote, and now tonight we have the minimum 5 board members, and you want to talk about bad timing, this is a prime example. Thank you.
So that's the 3rd time you said that, and I will just respond to that.
Can I rebuttal?
No, I will speak last, and then we'll call the vote. The vote was not 6-2, it was 4-2 with 1 abstention. You remember we had 7 members here. We started the meeting with 8. Ms. Morrison had to go to the dance recital for her granddaughter and was unable to be present for the vote. It was 4-2 with 1 abstention. I was one of the 4. After hearing that, as it says on this agenda item, that pamphlets and flyers have already been distributed, and very specifically says, since public knowledge of vendor pricing would likely prevent a fair bidding process, the board should consider postponing the implementation of competitive solicitations until 2020 graduation. That was my regret of voting yes and subsequently finding out that a fair bidding process, in my mind, my own opinion, would be difficult. Since me having voted no instead of yes would have made it 3-3 with 1 abstention, I thought it only fair to offer it back up. You certainly said conveniently there are 5 board members here. Certainly you were not suggesting that any of us up here had anything to do with the 4 absent board members tonight. Mr. Knezik is in the hospital right now. I did not put him there. Ms. Morris informed me a week ago that she would not be here. I don't know the whereabouts of Dr. Shassel or Mr. Angel. Turns out 5 is what you need to conduct business. We could make all of these other decisions that are on the agenda tonight with 5. We can do it with 6, 7, 8, or 9. We certainly can't do it with 4. It was not my intention to have 5 here. I thought certainly we would have 8. We have 5. So That was the reasoning behind putting it on the agenda, is that my one vote, if I had changed my mind, the motion would have failed last week. So I thought it was only fair that I bring it back up and have a chance at a compromise solution. So, with that said, Madam Secretary, I'll call for the vote.
Four for, one against.
Motion carries. Mr. Latchley, I'll let you,
I'd like to make a motion that we approve 2.2, 2.3, 2.4, and 2.5 in global, please.
we have a motion from Mr. Latchley that the board approve items 2.2, 2.3, 2.4, 2.5 in globo, seconded by Mr. Broussard. Do we have any public comment on any of these 4 items? Do we have any board member comment? Madam Secretary, I'll call for the vote.
Five for, none against.
Motion carries. Next item on the agenda, item 2.6, review of budget recap and timeline. Mr. Guidry, I'll handle this one, and that if if all of the budgets are approved to proceed through the adoption process by the board this evening, then the next time we will discuss the budget will be on May 8th with special meetings, a special public hearing on the budget, and a special meeting to adopt the budget prior to our regularly scheduled board meeting for the month. Should any of the budgets not proceed to adoption tonight, then we will meet again on the budget, whatever budgets require a meeting, next Wednesday after the interim superintendent interviews, which would, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Guidry, would that push back the adoption date any? Or would we still have time to advertise and have it open for public inspection?
That would depend on the extent of the changes.
Okay.
If the changes are minimal, then I would think it would still allow us time to
Okay.
to proceed with the dates reflected on the calendar.
Okay. Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda, item 2.7, the proposed budget for the 1920 Group Insurance Fund. Mr. Guidry, are there any changes from the last time we reviewed this budget?
No, there are no changes.
I make a motion that we approve 2.7, proposed budget for 2019-2020 group insurance fund.
A second.
We have a motion from Mr. Latchley, and I'm going to slightly restate your motion, Mr. Latchley, that the board authorize staff to proceed with the budget adoption process for the 1920 Group Insurance Fund. Seconded by Ms. Morrison. Is there any public comment on the motion on the floor? Any board member comment? Madam Secretary, I will call for the vote.
Right, I'd like to make a motion that we approve. Oh, we gotta wait till
5-4, none against.
Motion passes. Next item on the agenda is item 2.8, the 1920 General Fund Budget Summary Projected Revenues and Expenditures. Mr. Latchley?
I'd like to make a motion that staff proceed and we go ahead and approve 2.8 Finance 2019-20 General Fund Budget Summary, Projected Revenues and Expenditures, with the words scratched out and changes on number 7, Future Capital Project Funds, to be replaced by Self-Funded Construction Fund, committed for school renovations / replacements, Prairie, Carencro Heights, and Lafayette High School.
All right, we have a motion that the board authorizes staff, and I'm going to read the whole paragraph here so everybody here and at home can hear what the changes are. The board authorizes staff to proceed with the budget adoption process for this fund after providing for the following adjustments. Reduce state MFP revenue by $1.688 million. Reduce transfer to charter schools line item by $173,000. Reduce transfer to capital projects fund 1.0 mils line item by $1.515 million. Reduce ESSA funding revenue line item by $300,000. Reduce regular education appeals by $330,000. Increase contingency by $30,000. Mills transfer from general fund to self-funded construction be designated for new self-funded construction budget line item named committed for school renovations, replacements, Prairie, Carencro Heights, and Lafayette High School. And the 7th, which has the change Mr. Latchley read, commit the first $330,000 of any realized increase in MFP revenue to regular education appeals, and the remainder of any realized increase in MFP revenue to the self-funded construction fund committed for school renovations, replacements, Prairie, Carencro Heights, and Lafayette High School. And now I've gone and forgotten, was it you, Ms. Morrison, who seconded? Seconded by Ms. Morrison. Do we have any public comment on this line item? Or on this agenda item, I'm sorry. Do we have any board member comment? As you may remember from last week's meeting, we were concerned that the state legislature would not approve the 1.375% increase in MFP funding for the 1920 school year, and so we asked staff to come back with changes to the general fund budget should that turn out to be the case. This afternoon, the House Education Committee voted to send the MFP formula back to the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education for revision, to asking that they remove that 1.375% increase, which comes to $1.688 million. Is that it, or do I need to include the $173,000 in that as well? Well, it's quite a bit of money, at any rate. And so these changes here are reflective of reducing our MFP revenue from the state should that formula be eventually adopted with no increase in MFP revenue. So the final item in the change list was any increase that does happen to materialize, if it is greater than 0, will go first to regular education appeals, and then all of the remainder will go into the school renovation and replacements line item for Prairie, Carencro Heights, and Lafayette High School. I wanted to make sure everybody understood exactly what was happening here. So I'll give you one more chance to comment after hearing that. Board members? Dr. Aguilar.
So just a point of clarification, that item 7, regular education appeals, I would prefer if it said regular education and/or special education appeals.
Mr. Latchley, is that fine with you? Ms. Morrison, is that fine with you? Madam Secretary, would you amend item number 7 to say regular or special education appeals? Is that sufficient? And then when you are through, please call for the vote.
5 for, none against.
Motion passes. The next item on the agenda, item 2.9, the proposed budget for the 1920 Special Revenue Fund. I will accept the motion.
I guess I'll make them all. I make a motion that we approve and direct staff 2.9 finance proposed budget for the 2019-2020 Special Revenue Fund. That the board authorizes staff to proceed with budget adoption process for this fund.
We have a motion by Mr. Latchley and a second by Mr. Broussard that the board authorizes staff to proceed with the budget adoption process for this fund. You'll have to make them all so that you'll get it right. You're going to need a lot of practice to get it right.
Well, no, it's written right after. I'm just going to read what it
I was
says.
waiting for you to read it.
Yeah.
Are there any public comment on the motion on the floor? Any board member comment? Madam Secretary, I'll call for the vote.
Five for, none against.
Motion carries. Item number 10, proposed budget for the 1920 Capital Projects Capital Improvement Fund. Mr. Latchley? Oh, Ms. Morrison?
Okay, I'll make a motion for the proposed budget for 2019-2020 Capital Projects, Capital Improvement Fund. That the board authorizes the staff to proceed with the budget adoption process for this fund.
We have a motion by Ms. Morrison. I was waiting for a second. Motion by Ms. Morrison that the board authorizes staff to proceed with the budget adoption process for the 1920 Capital Projects Capital Improvement Fund, seconded by Mr. Broussard. Do we have any public comment on this motion? Do we have any board member comment? Madam Secretary, I will call for the vote.
Five for, none against.
Next item on the agenda, I'm sorry, motion carries. Next item on the agenda, number 11, the proposed budget for the 1920 Self-Funded Construction Fund. Ms. Morrison?
Okay. I propose that the board authorizes staff to proceed with the budget adoption process for this fund after confirming the following adjustments. Number 1, increase transfers in general fund by $1,737.8 mils. Number 2, add 2 project line items, committed school site renovations, replacements, Prairie, Karen Crowe Heights, Lafayette High, 1.737 mil.
I would just make a slight correction that it's $1,737
Okay.
instead of $1,737. Okay. Wait for a second, if anyone agrees with this.
Second.
I have a motion by Ms. Morrison, second by Mr. Latchley, that the board authorize staff to proceed with the budget adoption process for this fund after confirming the following adjustments. Increase transfers in general fund by $1,737. Add a new project line item, committed school site renovations, replacements, Prairie, Karen Crowe Heights, and Lafayette High, in the amount of $1,737. $1,000, I'm sorry. Do we have any public comment on this item? Do we have any board member comment? Madam Secretary, I'll call for the vote.
Okay, Jeremy, your turn.
5 for, none against.
That's an easy one.
Motion carries. The next item is number 12, the proposed budget for the 2016 Construction Fund.
I propose that the board authorizes staff to proceed with the budget adoption process for this fund.
Second.
A motion by Ms. Morrison, second by Mr. Latchley, that the board authorizes staff to proceed with the budget adoption process for this fund. Do we have any public comment on this motion? Do we have any board member comment? Madam Secretary, I will call for the vote.
Five, for, none against.
Motion carries. Next item on the agenda, number 13, the proposed budget for the 1920 Southside High School Construction Fund. Mr. Broussard.
That the board authorize staff to proceed with the budget adoption process for this fund.
Very well done, Mr. Broussard. Do I hear a second? Seconded by Ms. Morrison. Motion by Mr. Broussard that the board authorizes staff to proceed with the budget adoption process for this fund. Do we have any public comment on this motion? Do we have any board member comment? Madam Secretary, I will call for the vote.
Five, for, none against.
Motion carries. The next item is number 14, the proposed budget for the 1920-2019 construction fund.
That the
That the
board,
board,
go ahead, Mr. Broussard.
that the board authorize staff to proceed with the budget adoption process for this fund.
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Broussard, seconded by Ms. Delachele, that the board authorizes staff to proceed with the budget adoption process for this fund. Do we have any public comment on this motion? Do we have any board member comment on this motion? Madam Secretary, I'll call for the vote.
Five, for, none against.
Motion carries. The next item is number 15, proposed budget for the 1920 debt service fund.
That the board authorizes staff to proceed with the budget adoption process for this fund.
I have a motion by Ms. Morrison, seconded by Mr. Broussard, that the board authorizes staff to proceed with the budget adoption process for this fund. Do we have any public comment on this motion? Do we have any board member comment? Madam Secretary, I'll call for the vote.
Five, for, none against.
Motion carries. Item number 16, the proposed budget for the 1920 combined sales tax fund.
That the board authorizes staff to proceed with the budget adoption process for this fund.
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Morrison, seconded by Ms. Delachele, that the board authorizes staff to proceed with the budget adoption process for this fund. Do we have any public comment on this motion? Do we have any board member comment? Madam Secretary, I will call for the vote.
Five, for, none against.
Motion carries. Item number 17, the proposed budget for 1920 School Food Service Fund.
That the board authorizes staff to proceed with the budget adoption process for this fund.
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Morrison, seconded by Ms. Delachele, that the board authorizes staff to proceed with the budget adoption process for this fund. Do we have any public comment on this motion? Do we have any board member comment? Madam Secretary, I will call for the vote.
Five, for, none against.
Motion carries. The final item on the agenda, the proposed budget for the 1920-2002 half-cent sales tax fund.
That the board authorizes staff to proceed with the budget adoption process for this fund.
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Morrison, seconded by Ms. Delachele, that the board approve staff to proceed with the budget adoption process for this fund. Do we have any public comment on this item? Do we have any board member comment? Madam Secretary, I'll call for the vote. And assuming this motion carries, the budget will be publicly advertised on April 25th and 26th. Motion does carry. From April 25th to May 8th, the public may come to the central office and inspect the budget on display in the lobby. And then on Wednesday, May 8th, there will be a public hearing on the budget at 4 o'clock, followed by a special board meeting to adopt the budget at 4:30 p.m. in this boardroom, followed by our regular board meeting at 5:30. Our next meeting is Wednesday, 8 days from now. At 5:30, we will be conducting interim superintendent interviews. Hopefully, we will see you there. Meeting is adjourned.